Hello and welcome to the Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. I'm Caroline Fisher, Associate Professor of Journalism at the University of Canberra. Hi Michelle, how are you?
Hi Caroline.
So this week politics was overshadowed by the release of the Grattan report yesterday into allegations of war crimes by Australia's Special Forces in Afghanistan. The inquiry report detailed allegations of 39 Afghan civilians being killed by 25 current and former ADF personnel during the Afghanistan conflict, and it also includes additional allegations of mistreatment of non-combatants and prisoners of war. So what does this report tell us about the culture of the SAS?
Well, it tells us that this culture was one that was dominated by arrogance, a warrior culture by the top of the SAS, and that there was intimidation of junior soldiers. There was this so-called blooding where a patrol level leader would get the junior soldier to murder a prisoner as his first kill, and essentially it was a culture of cover-up, and so bad things were done and they were hidden from those further up the chain.
That's what we're led to believe, and at the press conference yesterday, the Australian Chief of Defence, Angus Campbell, he apologised and promised reform, and Defence High Command said that they were unaware of this behaviour. Is that a credible response? Is it possible that High Command did not know this sort of thing was going on?
Look, I think that the report is convincing in terms of them not knowing, but the question is, how could this be so?
Yes.
How was it that they didn't know? Because I think everybody has known that the Special Forces culture, especially the SAS, Special Forces are rather broader, but this culture is a very tough one. And it's a sort of whatever it takes culture. And therefore, there was a need to supervise these activities much better, to make sure that the debriefing after operations was very thorough, and when there were rumours, to make sure that they were followed up very quickly. Now, by about 2015, and bear in mind that these crimes went over a number of years and the peak was about 2012-13. By about 2015, there were a lot of rumours and suggestions around, and the Defence Force started to do something about it. It commissioned, for example, a report on the culture, but it took a long time, and the preventive action that was needed was obviously not there.
So where does the buck stop with this? Who takes responsibility?
Well, I guess the buck stops with the Defence Force as a whole, and that means the top of the Defence Force. But it's a bit unsatisfactory because in terms of direct responsibility, it's being sheeted home at a very low level, and higher up nobody directly takes responsibility.
There's this, you've been in the field as a journalist. What was that experience like, and what did you experience?
Actually, I was in Afghanistan in 2002, which was less than a year after the initial attack. I wasn't there as a journalist. I went there on a holiday.
Oh.
I know this sounds a bit eccentric, but I saw a film about Kandahar and I thought I must go to Kandahar.
I'm thinking, what is it about being a political journalist that makes going to Afghanistan a holiday?
But I did, I was staying at a hotel where the journalists who were covering what was happening were staying. And I must say, there was chatter among them that the Australians played tough, were hard players. Now, not allegations of war crimes, but it was a reflection of the fact that the Special Forces are very out there, as it were, in their military operations, literally and figuratively. And this has been known over the years.
So this is undoubtedly going to cause reputational harm to the Australian military. I mean, at home as well, amongst the public, as well as overseas. Will reform repair that international damage and damage to our image internationally?
It'll take some time. I think that over time, yes, it will repair it. Whether it totally repairs it, historically it won't repair it because the deeds are done. But obviously, if adequate reforms are made, and I think, and this is very important, the process is transparent and there's full accountability for what's being done, yes, I think that it can be repaired. But one of the parts of that will need to be legal action against the people involved. Now, this is frankly easier said than done. The government set up a special investigator, which is the right thing to do, but that office will now have to redo a lot of work because it's not as though this material just goes to the Director of Public Prosecutions. It's not like that. They've got to re-till the field, as it were, get witnesses who can testify, all those things. It won't be easy, and in some cases it may be impossible.
Now, do you think it's likely that more allegations will now come forward, and perhaps beyond the SAS, that we will see people come forward?
The Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, has anticipated that might happen and has said to people who might know other things to come forward. So it is perfectly possible. Of course, Angus Campbell hopes very much that it won't happen, but what did occur during the inquiry was, as time went on, more people came forward. So it is possible that when people see this, they will think, well, I should come forward.
I mean, this is shocking. This is not what people expect. Australians don't expect this of their armed forces.
Well, that's right. That's right. And I noticed yesterday someone was comparing it with what was done by Japanese troops in the Second World War to some of our prisoners. It is a quite shocking thing. There's no doubt about it. And I think that the Australian public will be shocked and disturbed by it, as the Prime Minister said a week or so ago when he was anticipating the report.
Do you expect some rewriting, the retelling of the Australian story in Afghanistan because of these revelations?
Well, obviously there will be a retelling, and of course when you look back on that war, it was a war which was not politically contested, unlike the Iraq War. So the debate about it in Australia was really quite limited, but when you look back on its objectives beyond the initial attack to try and strike at the terrorists, really the achievements of that war pretty limited.
So prior to the release of the Grattan report, our national focus was back on COVID-19 and the new cluster outbreak of cases in Adelaide. Now South Australia's gone into a short and sharp lockdown. Do you expect South Australia to come in for criticism that maybe its measures are too extreme?
Well, it is coming in for some criticism. It's interesting that the Prime Minister, who is incidentally in quarantine at the lodge after his trip to Japan, was sounding sort of as though, well, I can't engage in this argument and sort of going along with it. But borders have now been shut with South Australia by most states, actually, not New South Wales, but critics do think that this is an extreme measure, and it's raised this whole argument again about whether the virus should be eliminated,
yes.
That should be the goal, or whether it's suppression, which is what the Prime Minister supports. And what the critics say is, even though the national policy is suppression, that really these states like South Australia are going for elimination.
Yeah, I mean, it mirrors what happened in New Zealand with the outbreaks
Yes.
in Auckland, etc. It seems to be following that model, really.
Yes, and it does raise the question of whether you can sustain this over months and months. It's so much a stop-start policy that for businesses, it's really, really difficult.
Indeed. I mean, the Prime Minister had hoped to have, the country open by Christmas. Do you think this will interrupt that plan?
Well, it certainly is slowing it down. Whether it'll stop it, I guess, it depends what happens in South Australia over the next few days. But it does mean that people who are trying to make preparations to go interstate for Christmas, it complicates it a lot.
Yes, it does. Now, Parliament's continuing to sit next week?
Parliament's the week after, and that sits last 2 weeks.
Okay, and what do we expect coming up for that?
Well, we expect some industrial relations legislation to be introduced. That's been flagged, and there's quite a lot of bits and pieces really in the run-up to the end of the year.
Okay, well, Michelle, thanks very much. Have a great week and look forward to talking to you about it then.
Thanks, Caroline.